how serious is this climate crisis?
It's literally deadly. Like, if we don't do something about it within the next 10 years, we won't have a home to live on.
Environmental racism is the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color. It's not a coincidence that factories, highways, and other major polluters are located in the communities that they are, leading certain people much more likely to breathe polluted air. The Mott Haven neighborhood of the Bronx, for example, just over the bridge from where we're shooting, has some of the worst air quality in the country. The population, 97% Black or Hispanic. 22-year-old Daphne Frias is a New York native and student activist known for mobilizing hundreds of people for the March for Our Lives movement, and 0 Hour, who promote climate and environmental justice.
The racist tendencies behind the climate crisis is something that I've personally experienced, and a huge reason why I got into this movement. Growing up in West Harlem, I saw how urban planning and city planning was disproportionately targeted towards Black and brown communities with climate destroying infrastructures. Like where I live, there's a huge bus depot, which is the largest bus depot for the MTA in Manhattan. There's a water treatment plant, and there's also a huge on-ramp to the highway here in New York City. And if you're having cars constantly coming off the highway, you're going to have huge levels of exhaust that's going to be polluting our air quality. And these are things that you often don't see in more affluent communities, and it begs the question, why is that happening? Just because you're poor and you're a community of color doesn't mean that you don't deserve a good quality of life. If we're not talking about environmental racism when we talk about the climate crisis, we're really not addressing the climate crisis at all.
When you think about justice, right, environmental justice, what is that and what does it look like?
A lot of times we talk about going plastic free or going vegan. All of those are great and important if you can do so. But if you're in a low income family and you're living in a food desert where the only options for you are maybe one supermarket and fast food chains, you're not going to be going vegan. You're not going to be worrying about how do I get tote bags and how do I make sure that my groceries aren't in plastic bags. Like, that's not your concern. So how do we adjust our measures to meet every standard of living within our country? That's how we achieve environmental justice. Unfortunately, the climate crisis is tied economically to our capitalist society and the way that our money moves throughout our country. And if we're passing legislation that affects the money flow of America, everybody immediately puts up warning signs and says, hey, that makes us feel uncomfortable. Why is that going on? And my response to that was like, well, I think we should all have a planet to live on and have nice air to breathe and have good food to eat and clean water. Like, I don't think those should be mutually exclusive situations. I'd much rather have a planet to live on than money in my pockets, because if I don't have a planet to live on, what money am I going to be spending? And I think that's why a lot of young activists, when we're talking about legislation, we want to pass legislation that is firmly creating patterns of divestment to the fossil fuel industries, because they are the ones who control sort of the capitalist sector of what is the climate crisis. And if we're not divesting money from them and putting it into community resources that can help heal our earth, we're not going to make any progress towards having a cleaner and safer, healthier earth.
Mark Chambers is New York City's Director of Sustainability. He's tasked with overseeing the entirety of the 5 boroughs and implementing ways to reverse human-induced climate change.
Just to reiterate, that plastic, if left untouched, will be there for 100 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yo, that's crazy.
So it depends on the types of plastic, but for the most part, yeah, and in some cases even longer. It all depends on the types of plastic. But the point is that plastic breaks down; it doesn't disappear. So it may look a little bit different than it does right now, but it will always be here with us. And so we have to be able to do better and come up with different products and different materials that we already have in abundance that can do the same job, but they're not gonna, the problem is that we are tied to petroleum, tied to fossil fuels. That's what goes into those plastics. So they have an invested interest in us to keep using them. And we have to change that, and we have to bring all of our kind of collective energy to bear to make sure that we're forcing them to give us something different.
Basically though, it's all about the dollar. That's what you're saying.
It's all about the dollar, and it's all about how much fossil fuel companies have integrated themselves into our lives and how we have to break that reliance. Think about it like this. There are a lot of systems that support us living our lives. It's not just about individual responsibility. There's a narrative that says that if everyone changes their behavior and that that's the only thing that's going to impact climate change. It's not that. It's that to a certain extent, but we need aggressive federal leadership in order to actually change some of the big systems that help us to be able to live better lives, and ones that are not draining all the resources of the planet in order for us to maintain the status quo.
The presidential election is just a few months away. For many, it's one of the most important elections in our country's history, with tensions extremely high. If we do not take action at the polls that lead to systemic change, our Earth will continue to trend negatively.
Climate change is real. Those that do not believe it's real are in dereliction of their duty and need to be replaced by people that do. There's a role that we all have to play in being able to make sure that we are growing the tent of people that are relying on facts and science to be able to meet the challenge. And that requires there to be adults in the room that need to be able to act with the urgency and the sophistication that's necessary. We don't have the time to waste, because we do not have the time for that.
Is it important for us to hit the polls with climate in mind?
It's incredibly important for everyone to do the research to make sure that you understand the facts. And the facts are that our world is changing. Our climate is changing rapidly.
I want to say first and foremost, for the Gen Z vote, if you don't have a strong climate plan, whether it be for a senator, for a congressman, for assembly, and for president, Gen Z is not going to be voting for you.
So this election for many will be the first presidential election that they're able to take part in. One, just can you kind of speak to the importance of that? And two, for those who are maybe undecided or are seeking more information, where would you direct them to go?
So the best way to be a climate conscious voter at the polls is to see where your politician is accepting money from. A quick search of the politician's name and sort of payroll will publicly reveal where their money's coming from. It's a law that they have to disclose these things. And if you see oil companies on the top of those lists, if you see travel companies on the top of those lists, they're definitely accepting money from fossil fuel industries. The best thing to do is maintain pressure and constant communication with them. You can write letters, you can make phone calls and ask them, well, I remember you saying that you were going to pass, blank specific bill when you were campaigning. What is the progress on that bill? Are you still going to pass that bill? It's about creating the habit to vote in every single election, not just in a presidential year. Vote for your school board, vote for your mayor, vote for your assemblyman, vote for your governor. Any vote that's out there, vote for it, because every layer of legislation and every layer of governing bodies out there creates sort of a cake that represents our governmental system in this country. Also, remember to fill out your absentee ballots, because you never know if you're going to be off at college or vacationing with your friends or just simply away from the polls whenever the elections might happen. Even if you end up being home, it's still really important to have a backup and have a way for your ballot to get heard and casted.
It's not even just voting, which I think is relevant, but everyone also needs to, I think everyone needs to fill out the census as well. So if they go to my2020census.gov, it takes less than 10 minutes. But that determines how we get funding, and that funding determines who has the power to be able to push the policies that really confront and meet the challenge that we're facing. And that is going to be one of the big determinants of whether or not we're able to do what we need to do. Because otherwise, we can all pretend like there are different sides to this, but there aren't. Climate change is real, it's happening now, and if we don't confront it with everything we have, then we are going to see more death and destruction, and that is not an acceptable outcome, especially considering that it's not equally borne across all of our population. There are Black and brown communities all across the country that are on the front lines of a changing climate, and we owe it to them, and we owe it to all of us to be able to meet this moment with aggressive action. There's no room on the sidelines.